I'm Linda of Linda Bertine Creations, and happy Quiltober! If you're joining me for the Pumpkin Spice Quilt Along, welcome! Today's session is session 4, and we're going to show you how to add fabric paints or acrylic paints to your quilted piece. So if you followed along with me by now, you should have a piece that looks something like this. And we're going to add some paint to give it a look like this. So let's go to my studio and get started. Hi, and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to take our pumpkin spice pattern and we're going to add some lovely, lovely fall colors to it to make it vibrant and to make it a fun piece to hang on your wall. And I'm going to share with you what I've learned and what I recommend. And the first thing I'm going to share with you is you must have removed all of the topper or the water-soluble stabilizer that we used as a pattern. It might have even taken you to the sink where you've added warm water and you scrubbed it, but it should feel really soft, just like a standard quilt would feel. And you probably have noticed that I went ahead and did an all-over pattern on the background just to give it some texture when I add the color. Now, I haven't done anything else other than just finish quilting the outside and rinsing this. Once again, remember in the instructions I recommended that you pre-wash your muslin to remove any sizing that might be on it. Now I have loaded up here with all of my favorite fabric paints, and we'll talk a little bit about them, how to use them, and I'll demo a couple of different things here. Now the one thing about your fabric paints is you want to know how viscous it is, or what. Is it a thick paint? Is it a thin paint? Because the thin paints have a tendency to run and spread, and you need to be able to understand that. So things like Dynaflow or acrylic inks, or even you can use standard fabric paints that are more thick, and you can dilute them by like 20% with some water, and that'll give you an inky or a watercolor-like paint to work with. Also, if you have translucent paints, those are also inky or watercolor like. What that means is they're going to add color, but you may have to add layers of color to get them to be more vibrant, or definitely use less water to make them vibrant. Remember, the more water you add, these are acrylic paints basically, they're all acrylic based. The more water that you add to a fabric paint, the lighter the color is going to be. Now, the other kind of paints that we're going to talk about are those that have a little bit of body to them. The Luminaire, we've got these lovely, the Jacquard ones here, the Textile Traditions. That's what I'll be using also today. I also have some that are metallic, like the Luminaire or the Cetacolor Opaques. One thing about the metallic paints when it comes to fabric paint, they do change the hands slightly. You get a slighter, stiffer product, and I'm pretty sure it's the metallic element to the paint. The other ones like the Dynaflow and the Tulip Soft, they're designed so the hand of the fabric never changes. And so as we go through these things, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. The one thing I'm going to tell you not to use are your 3D textile paints. These have an element that actually make it puffy, and they're really hard to get that out. You'll end up with clumps and different things. So if you have something that is a dimensional paint, don't use that for this product. Now, the other things that I have a large sheet of plastic covering my work table because I know I'm going to be messy. I also have a foam core or a piece of poster board here that is covered with plastic, and that's going to be my work surface. I have a palette, which if I'm going to use bodied paint or paint that's a little thicker, I can use just a standard styrofoam plate. For my inkier fabric paints, or the real thin ones, I like to use something with a little bit of a well or a painter's palette, because that actually helps to control it. I also have a container of water, and it's just water that I use. It's just a recycled container. And then I do have a spray paint, or a spray bottle with water in it. And this spray bottle with water can help you if you want to do an all over maybe a watercolor type background. You can saturate your fabrics and let your paints flow back and forth. The other things that I have are standard acrylic brushes, and you can get these in a variety of places. I do like some flat, thicker brushes. I do like some thin brushes and some super fine. I also will use a sponge brush, especially when I'm saturating an area with water, just to help move it. Now, something else you may depending on what you're painting, you may want to use something like a textile medium. And instead of adding water, the textile medium helps to make the ink or the fabric paint flow smoothly on the fabric. And what we're going to try to do is actually get the paint into the fabric so it bonds, so it never washes away, because once we heat set these are going to be permanent fabrics or fiber colors. And then we also have some paper towels, so in case I have an emergency, I can stop it. The other thing I like to use is an ordinary hair dryer, and that is if I see my colors start to run, I can hit it real briefly with some hot air and get that to dry as quickly as possible so I don't continue. Let me share a secret with you about my other project here. I started out by saturating the entire thing, the whole thing across, and I started painting my pumpkins, which was fine. But by the time I got to my third pumpkin, I noticed that this pumpkin was wicking out into an area. I wanted to make this more of a pumpkin patch and not a midnight pumpkin patch. But what happened then is I had to go back with some of my opaque colors and paint over my orange and yellows that bled through onto my white background. And so this became, and then adding, of course, a little bit of the textile paint for a little bit of a shimmer, this became Midnight in the Pumpkin Patch. So there are some things that we have to be mindful of when working with fabric paints. But for the most part, you yourself want to wear some clothes you don't mind getting painted, because I will tell you this, no matter how hard you try, you will probably find yourself with a little bit of paint on you. It's not a bad thing, but could be an effect you're not desiring at this moment. So what I'm going to do to get started here is I'm going to paint my pumpkin. And I like the inky watercolor look. I don't know why, but it just seems to appeal to me when it comes to pumpkins. And so all I'm doing is dipping my flat, large brush, which contains just nothing but straight water from my tap. And I'm just saturating my pumpkins a little bit here, because this is going to help the inky fabric paints, which are the Dynaflow that I like to use. I also like to use the Dynaflow paints when I do my faux batiks, and in those projects I will outline my design with a resist, whether it is it could be something like school glue, a blue school glue, or it could be also an actual resist used in silk painting. Now I don't know if you noticed that, but that paint came out of the container fairly quickly. And I'm also going to just do a yellow, and I think an orange, and maybe a brown, because sometimes you have to have a little bit of shading. Now the one thing about fabric paints or any kind of acrylic paints that I have learned is you always start, when you're mixing colors, start with your light and add your dark. All right? It sounds a little counterintuitive, but that is the best way that they work. And I'm just getting my brushes wet here, and I'm going to dip my paintbrush in the yellow. And I'm going to add some highlights where I think the yellow should be on these pumpkins. Just giving a little bit of yellow here. Oh, I think maybe the sun's really going to hit this one here. I might give it a little bit more. But remember, the more pure, using the Dynaflow straight from the bottle, the more intense or pure the color is going to be. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to actually move this over and grab a little bit of yellow to this and make an orange yellow, and then just kind of come in here and do just a little bit of shading around each of these highlights here, just to give it a little bit of pump here. And I'm trying to kind of, if I was to explain this, I'm trying to keep the outside edge of my perimeter fairly dry, because I want to be able to paint all of this in one setting, and I don't want to have to come back and fight a wicking of it going outside the perimeter. But I do know it's a realistic problem, and it definitely could happen to me. Now, to get the watercolor look, you do have to keep the elements that you want to bleed into one another fairly damp. And I'm going to add just a little bit of brown to my orange here, because I think inside the creases of the pumpkin we're going to have a shadow. And I want to do that with this little bit of orange brown. And that's going to also enhance some of that pumpkin painting, thread painting that we did earlier. Oops, I'm going to need to get some more orange. I'm kind of conservative because you can always add more, but you can't put it back in the container once it's been poured out, and that'll help keep your paints contaminant free and then make them last a lot longer for you. I've had some, oh my goodness, probably since 2010 or 8 that I've continued to use in my projects. So and I did list some of my favorite paints on my blog if you go there for the supply list. So if you haven't checked that out, that might be something you want to look at. And along the bottom here, you know, your pumpkin's going to be sitting hopefully on some grass. So we're going to give it a little heavier, a little bit darker shadow here too. All right, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to add maybe just a little bit of red over here, because sometimes pumpkins get that lovely golden orange red too. Okay, I went ahead and just finished drying this. Now, as you can see, I did have some little bit of seepage outside, but I'm not going to let that bother me. It's part of the look that I like as far as getting these colors to blend and giving it a nice fall sheen. But I am going to switch it up now, and I am going to use some of the thicker bodied paints that I have, and I'm going to show you how to work with some of these. And so once again, I just got my little palette here. I am going to start out with some greens because I think adding a green leaf is kind of fun, and with the vine we got here. But your thicker bodied paints are actually going to make this easier to, how do I say it, to stay in the lines with. And these would be similar to the tulip paints that you can get at Hobby Lobby. In fact, these I picked up at Joann's. So check online, they should be available. And I'm just starting with the green here. I do want to add just a little bit of, I think, the blue. Because sometimes, now once again, on these thicker bodied paints, you can actually just use a paper plate as your palette. because they won't run. So that is the beauty of these. And what I'm going to do over here is just give myself a little blue. Now, here's the secret when it comes to mixing paint. If you want to dull your color or change it in a dramatic way, you can always add just a tad bit of blue or brown. And this is kind of, I don't know what, they call it russet, so it looks to me more like a brick color, but I'll go with it. It works for me. And what I'm going to try to do is kind of get kind of an olive-like green. I think that's a color that I would like for this to be. And so I'm going to start out with my light color, which will be my green. And I'm probably going to come in here and add a little bit of the russet and just see what I get here. Nope, that's not what I was looking for. Try it again. Go green. I think I'm going to add just a hair of this. Could make it more yellow, and then a scoop of this. Maybe. Okay. And I might add just a little bit of the textile medium to make it inky, or to make it flow a little better. It shouldn't dilute the color, but it should make it a smooth application. That's what I'm hoping for. And I am going to start with my vine here, and I'm just going to paint in between my echoes because I think that's kind of a neat looking surface here. But I don't know if you can tell, this paint has a little bit more body to it now, and it just seems to glide right on. Once again, most textile paints are of acrylic base. So what that means is you just use straight soap and water to wash your brushes, soap and water to wash your palettes that you want to keep. I like to use Dawn dishwashing liquid, and when you finish cleaning out your brushes, never leave them in water like this. You want to rinse them, and then I always leave them upright, and that'll maintain the integrity of the tip of your brush. Okay, we're going along here. I'm kind of, now keep in mind, the more water that I add to this, the more ink-like it will be, and we'll have that same seepage going out of my predetermined lines here. We don't want that, so I'm just kind of trying to maintain the integrity. Add just a little bit. Acrylic paints air dry rather quickly, so if you get them on your outfit, you want to make sure that you keep your outfit wet and as you try to get the stains out. Acrylic paints often are latex paints that we use when it comes to painting our walls, so you're probably familiar with how to clean those type of things up. But it's the same situation. Okay, and I went ahead and just mixed it just a little bit darker for this base here. I might want to add some more green though. I'm thinking maybe the outside edge has kind of gotten a little bit of sun, changing the color of it. And I might actually go to a little bit bigger brush. I think that's this one in here. And remember, if you don't rinse your brushes in between, whatever you last use on your brush is going to be what you get to start with on this one. So I'm going to add some green here and just tint it slightly. Let me take a scoop of this. And come back in here and give it a little bit of life. Using this as my highlight. And I may want to just kind of come in too, just a little bit more green. right, it's kind of a fun little stem there. Now we're going to work on our leaf. And sometimes when you look at things in the garden, you see things differently than you normally would. I think when you start to paint, you kind of see, just a lot of different shading and a lot of different colors that come into play in your garden that you may not, when we're first young, we make everything solid green, and then we realize, well, you know what, there is, look at this, down the center there might be a hint of brown, or there might be something else, a different element that we may not have picked up on right away when we were younger. And how you do the shading can kind of impact that. And so what I'm doing is actually trying to make my leaf lighter on this side with maybe a healthier green, letting the leaf turn its brownness kind of towards the center of it. Coming in here and just adding a little bit of yellow, but keeping if the paint maintains its wetness, you can always come in and blend. That's the part I like about these paints. Pretty, pretty, pretty. Okay, and then I'm going to also come in just a little bit more yellow, because it seems like when I look at the top of a vein, it's a little bit higher up and it seems to hit. And so I might just come in here just ever so slightly in each one of my C's and just add a little bit of yellow green here. Not getting the sparkle I want, so maybe I am going to come in with some metallic. This is a Lumineer paint. I'm just going to add a little bit of this. I want it to be pretty obvious that there's a highlight here. And so I'm just going to come in. Oh yeah, getting what I want here. Now the Lumineer, remember I said they're a little thicker, and it may actually cover up your stitches. So the lighter the hand that you apply it with, the more you're going to see some of that dark colored thread come through. But anybody who knows me knows if I can put a sparkle on something, I certainly will, and I do like a little bit of sparkle. Okay. I might even come up over here and just keep carrying out some of that highlight. Maybe even on my viney parts, because there's going to be some on this too. Okay, maybe just a little in my pumpkin. Okay. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to my hair dryer and dry this out just a bit, and then we'll talk about how to camouflage our spreading of our ink on our background. All right, so I'm going to start my hair dryer up and give it a spin. So we're back again, and we're going to finish out the rest of our background. Now this is where I'm going to go ahead and probably add more water. Now it is dry, even my thick pieces are dry, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go dark again. I think I kind of like the contrast between the blues and the oranges and the greens, but I'm going to use more of my Dynaflow, because they just really give it that inky dark look. But here again, just like I was worried about these flowing out, I'm going to worry about my Dynaflow coming in. And so I'm going to probably be using more of my heavier bodied paints closer to the pumpkin, just to keep it, I don't want to say static, but to keep it so it doesn't flow everywhere. So these are my Dynaflows here, and I'm just adding some of my favorite colors that are kind of dark and midnight swirly looking. I've got an emerald green, I've got a violet, and an indigo, I think, or what do they call that? Oh, periwinkle, sorry. Those are the three that I'm going to probably use on the background, and then a little bit of green for the dirt, your pumpkin's going to sit on something, and it should be kind of a shade of ground, whatever you call that, whatever color you imagine your ground being like. And once again, I am going to grab my larger brush and add some wetness. I could spray with my spray bottle to saturate the bottom, but once again, this is a controlled spray. This is where my pebbles are. I'm kind of starting out here. So I'm probably going to start by moving some green over and adding my emerald to it, and maybe just a hint of red. Give me kind of a base here I'm looking at. Now, I don't know if you can see as I'm working on this how my pebbles came out and just gave it a really nice texture here. But the more, a little bit of red to that green, that's going to give me kind of a brown, earthy kind of tone. But I don't want to lose my green. Bring it back. I'm kind of using my my line of Echo quilting that I did around my pumpkin is kind of the perimeter, not to cross that line, unless I'm going to use my fuller bodied fabric paints. I'm going to slide this up. You can see what I'm doing here. Now, a little secret here, if you use colors that are side by side on the color wheel, they always seem to go together. It's a recipe that the artist, the art world, calls analogous. And so anytime you do that, if you can keep your references kind of similar, so like when I was working with the pumpkin, I was using things on the warmer side of my color wheel, things like, I had orange and yellows and reds and some browns, which is, brown can be, adding black to can be a shade of yellow or red. But when you do that, then what you're kind of doing is giving a nod to being able to make it look intentional. Same thing with the outside here. I'm going to stay with the similar colors, so I've got a little bit of yellow, not a lot, but more, it's a lime green paint. And what I'm doing here is staying with the blues, the greens, and the purple side of my color wheel. And what that'll do is it will give me, it's an opposite end of the color wheel compared to the pumpkin, but it should give me some contrast and give me a pleasing a range of colors to use when I am doing this. And so I'm going to add some blue here. Once again, we're just blending different colors. There's not really I don't have a set plan here, folks. I'm sorry if that's what you were hoping for. But just letting you know that you can use same colors. If you take that color wheel and just divide it in half, you're going to get a real pleasing array of colors that you can work with. And it's the same thing when you're choosing colors for your quilts. If you stay on one side or the other of your color wheel. Now I am intentionally going to stay maybe to the blues and purples around my stem so that my lovely painted leaf and its vine are going to stick out really nice. So I'm going to do something contrasting here. And I'm trying to keep my background fairly wet so that it plays together and blends lovely. And this is not a saturated wet, this is a slight damp, not a heavy wet, let's put it that way. And I'm just looking for a tint, not necessarily a heavy painting, if that makes sense either. We're just kind of adding and letting it wick around and blend. It's a watercolor technique. It's a wet on wet technique if you're looking for a description of it. But what this does is it kind of just gives it a soft kind of pastel background. Nothing really definite's going on here, but you can tell that it's just adding some texture and some color. I do need to keep this edge over here fairly damp if I'm going to come back and paint on that. So I need to probably take care of this side of the painting too, of the piece. Because once you let it get dry, then there's no going back. You can't come back in and blend. That's the only sadness to this whole wet on wet experience. If you get a hard line, you may want to try to come back with a little bit of moisture, a little bit more color to kind of soften it. The water will always soften your lines and how it looks. But sometimes too, as you move into the pumpkin, if you can go lighter and go deeper with your colors, more bold on the outside, you might also have a more pleasing, kind of gives it like a halo in the middle type look. I know, so many considerations, right? So we're back again, and we're going to add now some of our heavier bodied paints and do a little bit of filling in the lighter areas and adding some fun different types of features to this. Okay, so I have some paints here, but I want to add just a little bit more of these Luminaire. These are my metallics, and what I like about the Luminaire is you're going to see that's purple, but eventually it'll rise with the gold sheen. It's kind of a fun little paint because it adds a little bit of sparkle, but it also helps to maintain kind of the color that we were using. And this is a heavy-bodied periwinkle. It almost looks more blue than periwinkle, if you ask me. And then here's a teal. Just some of the colors that we were going to use on the other, just coming back in. And then I'm thinking I also want to do maybe a little bit of the Seta. It's kind of a, it's a metallic, like a fuchsia almost. think that might actually be kind of fun to spice things up just a bit. And you notice I got a clean brush for this one because I didn't want to, don't want to contaminate your containers. And I still have some gold over here. And I am going to use a thinner, I think I want this one, a real thin brush here. And you know, when you think about pumpkins, for sure, you want to kind of also maybe just add like a hint of some vines. And this I'm just swirling back and forth. You can use some of your textile medium to keep your paints kind of inky. And they also have like a flow that you can use to keep this going. But I just noticed that it kind of disconnected on me. But you can put lots of swirls in here. There's nothing wrong with pumpkin swirls. Just to kind of give it a finish here. It's kind of the metallic, darker green. Just kind of hitting a little bit of it here. Now another thing that you can do is if you have Pigma pens, you may want to just retrace and you can actually fill in that little bit of the pumpkin area with a permanent archival black marker or ink that would give the illusion that you had a thicker outline. And I am just doing curls. So if you remember the curls that we actually quilted in here, it's just the same kind of technique. Just painting some of it. Not really making it a hard and fast color, but just giving it a little bit of tint. Trying to keep it fairly thick as far as like a fairly opaque is what the word I think I want to use right now. It's fairly opaque so that you know that you can't see where the orange has seeped through, but I also want it to blend in with my watercolor-like areas because I think those are awfully pretty and well done, and I like to keep that kind of look. And so kind of blending it into what was my watercolor, but still letting it have its own identity here. Now again, these fabric paints can be used on most fabrics. I have yet to find one that I haven't put it on. In fact, I have a jean jacket that I did paint like in '08 with peacock feathers, and it's one of my favorite pieces, and I still wear it to this day. In fact, a lot of people think it's machine embroidered peacock feathers, but nope, it's just fabric paint. And I have laundered it in my laundry machine, my washing machine, and my dryer, although I don't totally dry it all the way. I do like to let my clothes somewhat air dry, just because I think that gives them a little bit, how do I say, nicer hand. And all I'm doing here with some of my swirls is adding a little definition to some of these swirls that I painted, so then when I come back in and do vines or something else, they don't look totally awkward because I've already done a little bit of swirling with them. Now you probably noticed I haven't even done my little vine there, but I'm just going to come back in with some of my sparkly green and just give it a little bit of a vine that way. Same thing here. I'm going to shade in some of this, the bottom side of this one, with just a little bit of this darker green. I don't know. I think it does look kind of like Midnight in the Pumpkin Patch. Well, send your comments down below. I'd love to see what you think of my part. Love to see what you do with this. If you go ahead and try to do your own pumpkin patch, I would love to see it. Please share. Once again, we'll be back together next week to add that binding on, and I'd love to see what you do. Hope you had fun with this pumpkin spice project. Thanks.